Hey everyone, I'm Kai Down, and today I'm going to be doing a full tutorial of the Line 6 HX1. I'll leave timestamps in the description box down below if you want to skip ahead to chapters. I really don't mind, this is probably going to be a long one. Let's go over the pedal quickly. We've got three different parameter knobs at the top. We've got an effect switch that lets you choose your effect. We've got these back and forward buttons. We've got a home button. We've got the overall bypass as well as a tap/flux switch. Then on the back of the unit, we've got a stereo in, stereo out. We've got a USB-C port, a 500 milliamp 9-volt port. On this side, we've got the MIDI in and the MIDI out. And on the other side, we've got the jack for the expression pedal, or an additional foot switch if that's what you need. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to plug it in. This is going to vary a little bit depending on how you're using the pedal, but since it's a compact pedal, there isn't really going to be that many different use cases. For power, you can either use the included 9-volt power supply, or you can probably just use one of the regular outputs on your power supply on your pedal board. I think this is why they chose the form factor of the HX1 specifically, since it only requires 500 milliamps. Let's start by powering this one on. As for the audio cables, this is where things are going to vary a little bit depending on your setup. If you're not using any distortion on your amp, you can just run straight into the mono input of the HX1 and then out from the mono output to your amp. If you're running the gain on your amplifier, you're going to want to use this in 4-cable method. This is where stuff like your drives and things like that go into the front end of the amp, while wet effects like reverb, delay and modulation can go through the effects loop. Now the HX1 does also have a stereo input and output function. If you're running something like a preamp pedal on your board, then you can run into the mono input and then 2 stereo outputs either to your interface or to your desk or wherever else. You can also run the HX Stomp in stereo after another stereo effect. So say if you've got a stereo reverb before it, you run into both of the mono input and the right input of the HX1, and then again just the normal stereo output. So with everything plugged in, it's time for you to get the unit updated. No USB cable is provided with the HX1, but since it's a USB-C cable, these are incredibly common. You probably already have one already. Let's plug it in. So with the HX1 plugged into our computer, we need to open up Line 6 Central. With Line 6 Central open, you'll see on screen it says Update Available. After clicking Download Update, you then click the Perform Update button to update it. After updating, you can safely close out of the Line 6 Central app and then reboot the HX1. Since there's no power switch, we just unplug the unit to reboot it. When we boot it back up, we'll hold the effects knob and the home knob to apply the defaults back to the unit. So with everything up to date, it's time to talk about the functions of the pedal itself. Getting started with this unit is super simple. Just hold the effect knob while you scroll and you'll flick through the different categories. Once you've found the category you want to be into, let go of the effects knob and then you'll be able to scroll through the preset like normal. I've picked the Air Apparent just for this portion of the demo. You'll see the screen says Air Apparent and we've got these 3 parameters up on the screen. These apply to the parameter knobs just below the screen. Hitting the left foot switch will engage and disengage the effect. We can use the page left and page right buttons to scroll through the different parameters available on each pedal. If at any point you get lost in the menus while in the HX1, you can always press the home button and it will return you back to this main set of parameters. Now that I've dialed in the pedal how I want it to be, it's smart to save the preset. Hold the home button down for 1 second and it will pull up the save preset view. The 3 parameter knobs still correspond to what you see on the screen. This leftmost knob will be your destination, so this is where the preset is being stored to. Since we don't have any user preset slots, you have to overwrite one of the factory presets in the unit. We're going to overwrite this factory preset 1 that says Vital Dist. Pressing the middle knob will clear the preset, and pressing the right knob will overwrite it. If you wish to rename your preset, you can move the cursor by using the left and right buttons, and then use the effect knob to select the character. If you want to save your preset as the default settings for this pedal, you can do so by holding the left and right buttons while in the preset view. You have 3 options on screen here. You can cancel overwriting the preset, you can restore it to the factory default, or you can save it as your new user default preset. I'm going to return mine back to the factory default just for the purposes of this demo. With my drive preset saved, I'm now going to turn over to a delay pedal instead and we'll show you some different parameters. I'll just load up the simple delay block here. Now, if you're running in the 4-cable method that I mentioned earlier, there will be a slightly different way of having this one come through the effects loop, but I'll touch on that when we get to the settings later on in the video. So back to the simple delay, there's one specific feature about delays and anything with repeats that is particularly useful here. If we tap the time button, it turns from milliseconds into note divisions. With it set to note divisions, this is going to be based on the tap tempo rather than the millisecond dialing in that you've set before. So if we set it for dotted eighth notes, then we tap it in, we'll get that perfect dotted eighth note delay. Now let's save our preset to another slot. Okay, so to switch between each of your presets easily, we're going to tap both of the foot switches at the same time. This now takes us into the preset scrolling list. You can press and hold either of the foot switches to rapidly scroll through the list. So now we'll press the home button and get straight back to that main menu again. The HX1 also has a tuner. If you press and hold both of the foot switches at the same time, for 2 seconds it will bring up the tuner. The looper works as a pretty simple one-button looper. I'm not going to show it in action now since I've not really got this unit plugged in properly, but it's, fairly similar to anything else you'd expect of a one-button looper. You press to record, you press to stop recording, you hold to undo, you hold again to redo, and you double press to store the loop in the memory. With the recording stopped, you press and hold again to delete the recording. The looper is also configurable via MIDI. If you plug in a MIDI controller to this, you can open up the looper to be a full 6-button looper instead. So while we're on the tremolo setting, let's talk about these Flux Controls. This is a totally new feature for the Line 6 HX1 and something we haven't seen in any of the other HX products. Now, if you are familiar with the snapshots in Helix, this works in pretty much the same way. Essentially, every preset can have 2 different sets of parameters for the same pedal. The difference between Flux and snapshots is that the Flux can slowly ramp between them at a speed of your choosing. Press and hold the parameter knob for the parameter you wish to change, and you'll see these 2 small nodes appear on the display. If we adjust the first one, just how we like it, we can then adjust the second one by pressing the Flux button. So I've just seen that this preset already has the Flux controls enabled. This does make it a little bit simpler. So for the first set of presets, we're going to set the speed super slow, the intensity all the way up, and then, we'll leave everything else as is. Then for the Flux control, we press the button and then we adjust our second set of parameters here. So just to make things really crazy, I'm going to max the speed out and then lower the intensity right down to the bottom. This means that when I press the Flux control, it will slowly switch between these. Further on the Flux controls, there are a few cool tips mentioned in the manual. If you set the Flux time to 0 milliseconds, it will act like snapshots, where it instantly switches from one to the other. These Flux controls are all available in the last pages of parameters of the unit. So here we're going to set the on time all the way to 0, as well as the off time. Now when I press the Flux button, you'll see it instantly switches from one to the other. On the other hand, if you set the timing super slow, you can actually reverse the direction of the Flux before it's even reached the peak. So here I've got them both set up for about 4.5 seconds. Let's see what that does. So the HX1 has MIDI in and MIDI out. I don't currently have a MIDI controller capable of controlling it, but if you are interested in seeing a full MIDI rundown of this one, it's something I can look into. The fundamentals of MIDI with the HX1 are pretty simple. PC messages are going to control all of your presets. PC10 will be your 10th preset, PC45 will be your 45th preset, and so on. It's pretty simple for that side of it. There's a full guide in the manual as to what the CC messages do, but CC0 to CC5 act as the controls for the actual physical controls on the pedal, such as the parameter knobs, the effects switch, and so on, while CC21 to CC49 controls all of the parameters pages. You can also configure the looper with the CC messages 60 to CC66. Now the settings menu has a ton of stuff to cover, but hopefully I'm going to break it down quite nicely into the different pages we have available to us. To access the settings, we're going to press and hold the effect knob. So the first page of the settings menu is a very simple noise gate. This is configurable per preset, which is super handy. The gate has 3 controls. On-off, which is pretty self-explanatory, threshold, which sets how quiet a signal the gate will latch onto, and decay, which sets how fast the gate functions. On page 2, we've got impedance controls. This lets you select the input impedance, which is a large reason why I chose the HX1 over using something like Helix Native. Input impedance is something of a rabbit hole that you can get into. Personally, I'm just going to leave this one on auto since it'll automatically calibrate for whatever pedal is being modeled. I/O config is where we start to finally set up the 4-cable method routing. Stereo stereo will function as a standard stereo in, stereo out pedal, while insert will be our 4-cable method. The insert position on pre will be before your effects loop and before your amplifier and everything, while post will be in the effects loop of your amp. On page 3, we've got your input and output levels. If you're just using a regular passive pickup guitar, you can leave both of these on instrument. However, if you're using something like a synth or active pickups, you're going to want this on line instead. Bypass type will select between the DSP bypass, where it's running through the pedal, or true bypass, where the pedal isn't in the chain at all. You will need to be on DSP bypass if you want something like trails on your reverb and delay, but true bypass will work for pretty much everything else. Oh, for the signal to run properly through the pedal for the 4-cable method, you're going to need this on DSP bypass too. Now page 4 is pretty basic. This is just going to be the visual cues from the unit itself. The first one's going to be your screen brightness. This just dims the screen, which I guess could be handy for lowering the power consumption. So the auto dim goes between 30 seconds and 20 minutes. Now tap flash is going to be whether or not the tap tempo button flashes. Page 5 has some handy features for presets. The preset select goes between instant and load. This is with that preset scrolling feature we saw earlier. If you click through, normally it will just load up whichever one you have selected, whereas on the load mode you have to manually enable the bypass of each preset. The preset min and max is quite handy if you're working on a little set list, since when you press the 2 buttons at the same time to pull up the preset view, it will scroll through a list that you've determined rather than from 0 all the way up to 127. So for instance, if you had 4 presets, you'd set the minimum one to the first preset and the maximum to the 4th preset, and it would quickly scroll between each of those. Page 6 is the TRS jack for expression pedal control. You can choose whether you want to have this one on expression pedal and a separate foot switch, or you can have it on 2 different foot switches. With it on 2 different foot switches, you get these other 2 options come up. You can select what you want those foot switches to do. Personally, I'd probably leave this on the default of previous and next so that you can scroll between your presets, but we've also got some other options too. You can set it up for the tap tempo, you can set it up for the flux button, or you can have it on this previous and next thing. Now page 7 is just going to be some expression pedal specific features. You can set the polarity of your expression pedal. This is if you're using your expression pedal and you notice that everything's reversed, you just flip the polarity in this menu and then it will work for you. Now the position of the expression pedal can be configured per preset or globally. This can be quite handy if you're going between something like, say, a wah pedal and maybe a pitch shifter. You don't want the pitch shifter to be stuck halfway down when you switch presets. The accurate way to run a delay pedal would be to have it on this authentic pitch, where when you change the time knob, it affects the pitch of the delayed repeats. However, you can set it to the transparent mode instead, which keeps your delays as they are. Page 8 is going to be your MIDI settings. MIDI channel sets which channel the HX1 is outputting MIDI to. MIDI through passes messages right through the HX1. MIDI PC RX will set whether or not the HX1 could be controlled with PC messages. On the next page, the RX clock sets whether or not the HX1 responds to MIDI tempo messages. Per preset and global tap tempo can also be configured here with the middle knob. The BPM control can be selected so that you can actually dial in the specific BPM you want each preset to be set at. Finally, for page 10, we've got some tuner settings. The first one is going to be your reference pitch. For 99% of use cases, you're going to want to leave this one on 440 Hz. However, for certain songs and, maybe certain people need other reference pitches, you can set that here. You can select the tuner audio to mute when you're using the tuner. You can set it to the dry bypass, where it just runs your guitar signal through, or you can have it to the affected bypass, where the effect is still active when you run the pedal through it with the tuner on. Lastly, the tuner flats and sharps just tells you whether or not you want to see, for example, an A flat or a G sharp. So that is as close to an exhaustive guide to the HX1 as I'm capable of mustering up at this time, especially since I haven't actually plugged the unit in properly myself yet. We've covered all of the settings, the buttons, the features, and the setup, so hopefully this helped you out. I will leave links to the manual in the description box if you'd like to check that one out for yourself if you're still stuck with anything. Also, if there's anything I happen to miss in this video, please let me know in the comment section and I'll happily expand on it further. Thank you so much for sticking around for this one. I hoped it proved useful to you. That's all for this. I've been Kai.